Recently I played Pokemon Red for the first time in about a decade, and one thing that stood out to me was just how painfully easy it really was. But why was that? Well, there's quite a few reasons really. I think the main reason is that in a game which came out during a time where making the most of every single byte of data was important, Pokemon had a lot of fluff. From Pokemon that were entirely outclassed by very similar Pokemon down to their typings, base stats, and even learn sets, to more importantly, introducing a truckload of useless moves, many of which being outclassed by more common, better moves, or just used as weak signature moves for some reason, many of which were almost entirely situational, with some of them being straight up broken. And combined with many trainers getting teams that didn't seem like much thought was put into them, many boss battles were cursed to carry these very moves. And in a game where you can just get a free 90 base power water move learned by many Pokemon, you almost always have access to tools which far overpower even the strongest trainers in the region. So I wondered, could I make this game any harder by going through my Pokemon journey as an NPC, using solely terrible moves? I mean, that's already how I live my life, so transferring these skills into a game shouldn't be too rough. And we'll do a Hardcore Nuzlocke. You already know the rules of a Hardcore Nuzlocke, but to summarize, if a Pokemon faints, it's no longer usable, I can't use items in battle, I can't overlevel past the next gym leader, and I'll be playing on set mode. So how do we define a terrible move? What's the criteria I'll be using? Well, quite frankly, there isn't one. I'll be playing this mostly by feel. I won't be explaining my reasoning for every move I decide to allow, but the kinds of things I'll be taking into consideration will be parameters like the base stats of a move, whether or not we have easy access to something that outclasses them, how situational or useful they are in a standard playthrough, so on and so on. One more important thing to note is that we're playing a Nuzlocke and not competitive Pokemon, so we'll also have to consider the game's progression balance as well. What I mean by that is, sure, a move like Surf with a base power of 90 completely dunks on a move like Water Gun with a base power of 40. But at the stage that you usually learn Water Gun, your levels are quite low, and it's probably the best stab you'll get at the time, so it really isn't a bad move. This will of course change throughout the course of the Nuzlocke, and as such, I'll be changing which moves I allow and ban as we get further into the game. This may seem a bit confusing to keep up with at first, so sorry if I lost you, but once you start seeing the kinds of moves I'll be using, you'll be able to draw the connections between moves fairly easily, with me explaining the more obscure ones. And that Surf comparison is actually relevant for a starter, Squirtle. I don't really know which starter makes this challenge harder, but I realized that I have yet to pick Squirtle during a Kanto playthrough. Tackle is actually a move I don't think deserves to be called terrible. It's not good, but as a basic attack for the start of the game, it's perfectly serviceable. However, if I ban Tackle, we can't use like 90% of our early encounters, so it's legal. I'll also be allowing moves like Growl and Tail Whip as they take up a whole turn to lower the stats of an opponent by one stage. Again, not terrible, but how often are you using them during a playthrough? Of course, the reason why I brought up that Surf Water Gun comparison earlier is that Squirtle learns the move Bubble at level 8. This has a base power of 20, which is pretty bad, but is a stab water move this early on, so for now, it's banned. Which means Brock isn't a free battle, even with Squirtle. We're at the start of the game, so the pool of available moves is quite low. Weedle usually isn't great, but Poison Sting is a 15 BP poison move, even worse than Bubble, with a worse type. Its damage output is basically negligible, so imagine if I told you this move's only utility was that it had a 30% chance to poison, 70% of the time being useless. Yeah, this move's allowed. And it might make Brock a bit nicer for us. Well, it's pretty evident how used to Leaf Green I am, as something I learned during this playthrough is that the two early game bugs are basically semi-version exclusives, in the sense that one is more common and the other is rare, with opposite odds for the other version. We land the much more common Caterpie, and Butterfree actually gets some decent moves. Confusion isn't stab, but it's still a base 50 power psychic move, so that might be a bit strong right now, meaning we're going into Brock using only normal and flying moves, no stronger than 35 BP, and both resisted by rock types. I don't need to test out my tackles to know they'll do nothing, so start using Tail Whip to lower Geodude's defenses, as it uses Defense Curl, raising its defense. Right, that was the only strategy I had. Well, the alternative is my tackle's doing literally 1 point of damage, so eventually I catch him on a turn he decides to use his own tackle, and Rattata's one actually does more than I was expecting. Though Geodude does very clearly outdamage me, so does Squirtle. Thing is, Rattata was my strongest Pokemon with tackle being stab, so everyone's subsequent ones will be a lot weaker. And that was even worse than I expected. And then he just goes right back to raising his defense. Well, it's clear that we have to work with 1 HP turns, but Geodude still does a bit too much to my Squirtle, my most defensive Pokemon, so I figure we should let him have a taste of his own medicine. Into Spearow, with whom I just start spamming growls, lowering Geodude's attack, and then he immediately lands a crit which ignores attack drops. Well, eventually we minimize his attack, but even this process left Spearow clinging onto his life. Geodude still seems to be able to do 2 points of damage, but with our head start, Butterfree eventually picks up the kill. Onix is a pathetic Pokemon. Aside from outright being weaker than Geodude, this one doesn't even get good moves. Stuck with Tackle and Bide. Bide basically giving us 2 free turns to lower its stats. He doesn't even get stat boosting moves, allowing us to actually tail whip him down. That's all we did. His defense is the absolute lowest it could be. Well, during this time I was also cutting down his attack, so after an ungodly number of tackles and a peck here and there, Onix goes down. That is the most I'll ever have to say about the Brock battle, and I'm basically boiled down to Tackle. Brock does give us a move that will be very valid for our run, Bide, which allows the Pokemon to store up energy for 2 turns, and returns back double the amount of damage it's taken during this time. This move is so bad, I can't even think of a situation that will be useful during this run. You can't do anything during these turns, so you're pretty much locked in. In fact, in this game, it lasts anywhere between 2 to 3 turns, so we can't even play around it. But with Brock down, I think we can allow Squirtle to use this pitiful stab move. I added a list to the right side, which I'll be updating as I go through the game, but I'll mention any significant changes. The only current change being relevant for the next encounter, our very own Geodude. Now Geodude does indeed get a stab move pretty early on, one that's even stronger than our current limit. Rock Throw has a base power of 50, a little stronger than Water Gun and Ember, and clearly that's far too powerful. So the devs, for the sake of balance, decided to give it a little nerf by cutting its accuracy by half. Did I mention it's only a little stronger than Water Gun? Even ignoring how bad of a nerf it is, why did they feel the need to nerf Rock Throw in the first place? The only thing I can think of is to make Brock easier for Charmander users, but none of his Pokemon even get rock moves. Just in case you aren't too familiar with the base power moves and what the numbers mean, that's not really an issue, but just as a benchmark, you can basically split attacking moves into 3 tiers for a mainline story. Tier 1 will be your early game moves like Ember, Water Gun, and Tackle, moves that Pokemon you catch will likely start out with. These usually have a base power of around 40. Tier 2 will be your mid to late game moves such as Flamethrower, Psychic, and Surf. Outside of Stab, these moves will likely require a TM for your Pokemon to learn, and will replace Tier 1 moves until the very end. These moves can range between 70 to 90 BP. And then you have Tier 3 moves which have a BP of 110 or higher, such as Blizzard, Thunder, and Solar Beam. These don't exist to necessarily replace Tier 2 moves, but rather to offer a stronger alternative which will have a drawback of sorts, such as being less accurate or requiring a turn to charge up. Super basic stuff that I typically wouldn't mention, and of course there are plenty of moves in between these tiers, but I didn't want anyone to feel as if I was just rattling off random figures. So now we have a Tier 1 Rock Throw that has an accuracy lower than a Tier 3 Thunder. I know Gen 1 is almost 30 years old at this point, but this balancing was bad for an RPG even in its own time. Geodude can use Rock Throw. Moving on, we have a battle with a rival, and Geodude's usually the perfect counter for him. Let's try out our new move. Pidgeotto goes down to a couple of Rock Throws, and Abra can't even attack us. But as it turns out, neither can we. Geodude, buddy? We've missed 12 Rock Throws in a row. Okay, I wanted to point and laugh at how bad this move was, but we've hit genuinely impressive odds. That's like a 0.02% chance of happening. We've basically found a shiny. Well, in the newer game at least. I would have liked to use Beedrill for Misty, but with a few of our Pokemon being able to evolve now, and even having our own water type, I'm not too concerned about her. I also decided to allow another type of move. Fury Attack is a multi-hit move, and multi-hit moves are pretty awful. They can hit anywhere between 2 to 5 times. There's a 3 in 4 chance they'll hit 2 to 3 times, and a 1 in 4 chance they'll hit 4 to 5 times. Each hit has a base power of 15. That means even at its best, it'll only have 75 BP. On average, it's closer to 45, a little stronger than Tackle. So clearly, these moves should also be nerfed, right? So once again, they decided to lower the accuracy. this time being a bit generous and leaving it at 85%. It's so unreliable that you may as well use tackle. Our new Raticate does almost half using weak tackles and is able to stay above half himself after taking Staryu down. But Starmie is a very strong Pokemon this early on. Quite frankly, I was expecting to lose a Mon or two here, but she spares Raticate's life using a weaker Water Gun, and we use a Tail Whip to make it easier for the next Pokemon. I figure we should cherish Misty's mercy and bring out Fearow to continue lowering its defense. Oh, I don't have enough experience with these games. I didn't even know that was an option for them. Well, surely she can't have more than one. And then she even uses a weaker tackle. Maybe Misty's also giving this challenge a go. Lower her defense once again. Fury attack is a bit stronger than Peck, and I'm a gambler. We land the bare minimum number of hits, and then miss. Well, I'd be getting a bit too comfortable with Misty as she finally decided to use her decent move, Bubble Beam, leaving Fearow on just 1 HP. God, had I managed to land myself in this position twice in a row, playing Gen 1. He hits 3 this time. We'll take Misty's pity. Bringing out Chicken on the tackle, she can wrap up the match with Gust, which in this game is a normal type move with the same base power of tackle. I don't even know why they felt the need to include this. It's basically the signature move of the Pidgey line, and the only other Pokemon learning it being Butterfree, who actually does get tackle. People usually talk about the technical issues and limitations when it comes to Gen 1, but even just some of the game design was pretty bad. I think this kind of shows that in the early stages of Pokemon's development, it was supposed to just echo the RPGs of its time. Pokemon getting a variety of normal moves as their basic attack, with loads of different moves being reskins of the same thing for flavor text, and a few stab moves they learned being their special moves. You know, before they decided to say fuck it and give rats the power to upset the natural balance of the planet's ecosystem. Leaving Cerulean, we can get the TM for Dig, and this is such a broken move to get right after the second gym. It's a ground type move that has the base power of 100, same as Earthquake. The cost being that it takes 2 turns to use, but even during the charge up turn, you're invulnerable to most attacks, so it doesn't even matter. I am bringing this up for a reason, but let's put a pin in that for now. That means that we have no super effective moves for Surge, who's usually seen as being a joke, so will he actually be difficult this time around? Well, we don't have super effective moves, but he doesn't even have moves that can hit us, Geodude being his natural predator. Geodude is somewhat rare, but even Diglett, a guaranteed encounter, would have been fine, as his Ace Raichu doesn't even get a normal move. There's a pretty long stretch before the next gym, but aside from catching a few new encounters, there really isn't much to talk about. I catch a Drowsy, who I rarely ever use due to him creeping me out. Psychic is a great type, but Confusion, the weakest Psychic move, has a base power of 50, which is still a little too strong for us. I think a Pokemon like Alakazam is still too strong to unban, even with a weak move, so Drowsy is probably going to be our best Psychic type. In Generation 1, Hypno surprisingly decent, thanks to special attack and defense being merged into one stat, Special. So, opposite to later generations where Hypno falls off drastically, in Gen 1 he has a special attacking stat of 115, which doubles as his defense. Its other stats are pretty awful though, so I've never considered a ban. It's just a shame that he probably commits other sorts of crimes. Seriously, why do half of the Psychic Pokemon in this game look like they belong on a list? Another interesting Pokemon I caught was Bellsprout. She gets a number of powder moves that can inflict statuses on Pokemon, which I was internally debating whether I should allow or not. Moves that can paralyze and poison aren't terrible by any means, but they aren't typically moves that I use in this game, and poison is a lot weaker as a status than it is in newer games. Add the fact that they only have an accuracy of 75%, and there's some nuance. Except for sleep. That's just plain broken. Pokemon will stay asleep from anywhere between 2 to 5 turns, during which time they can't do anything. That's pretty much just as good as getting a KO, and in this game it goes even further. Simply waking up costs an entire turn, so if you're faster, in theory you could just sleep block the opponent. But before making any more changes, let's take on Erica, another gym leader who's not only considered a joke, but one that many people outright forget. Her team feels like such an afterthought. While we don't add any new moves, Fearow resists grass and a super effective Peck does enough damage. We are lucky that she misses her first wrap though, as in this generation, it is broken. It does barely any damage, but once wrapped, the Pokemon can't do anything while HP is slowly sapped away. And like Sleep, it takes up a whole turn to be freed, so again, you could wrap lock the opponent if you're faster, which is why our very own Victory Bell is banned from using it. Next is Tangela, and let's talk about how sad her Tangela is. She only has 2 moves, Bind, a reskin of Wrap, and Constrict, a move that to this day I cannot think of a reason why it exists. See how much damage it did? That was with no attack drops or defense boosts. And that's because it has a base power of 10. 10. That's 4 times weaker than Tackle, literally a starting move. Remember, many early game weak moves are created with progression balance in mind. I don't know what this move was trying to achieve. The only other Pokemon that learns this is Tentacle, both Pokemon only being available after you get Surf, more than halfway into the game. Oh, but it has a 1 in 3 chance to lower speed, so it can't be too strong, I guess. I'm honestly just showing the Erica battle so I could talk about Tangela. Even Peck and a basic flying Pokemon is more than enough to bring her down. Speaking of which, the most basic of flying Pokemon, Pidgeotto, at level 29 still hasn't learned a single flying type move. It actually doesn't learn one until level 31, but with us being halfway through the game now, I think we can upgrade our moves a little to match the new difficulty curve. The main change being that I can now use moves that have a base power up to 50, so our Pokemon can finally use their basic stab moves, such as Hypno getting Confusion and Wartortle upgrading from its pathetic Bubble to a slightly less pathetic Water Gun. I also changed the accuracy limitations to include moves that have an accuracy of 85%, but also have less than 100 BP. This may seem a bit strong, but I specifically chose these parameters to target very few moves, 2 of which we can buy in Celadon City, Mega Punch and Takedown, 2 new normal moves that quite a few Pokemon can learn. These are about as strong as Strength, a free HM that we now have access to, but have the drawbacks of having an accuracy of 85%. This at least adds some decision making whether it's worth using a stronger move in exchange for having the chance to miss, without including the truly strong moves like Fire Blast. Takedown is a little stronger than Strength and Mega Punch, but also has the downside that we take damage as recoil, which is obviously not great for a Nuzlocke. We can also buy Submission, the strongest fighting move in the game, which only has a base power of 80, and an accuracy of 80, and also does recoil damage. Did they seriously think that this move needed that much of a nerf? Fighting isn't even that strong of a type in this game, considering Dark and Steel types don't exist yet, but there are 2 even worse moves that we can get here. We can buy the TMs for Egg Bomb, a move that has 100 BP and 75% accuracy, which is learned by Execute, Chansey, and Mew. That's it. Ignoring the last one as it's a legendary which can learn every TM, why did they feel the need to sell a TM that can only be learned by 2 Pokemon? Pokemon that don't even like using this move? Why is it even a TM? But that's not even the worst one. Here you can also buy the TM for Razor Wind, a charge up move like Dig, which has the base power of 80. Now why is this bad? Well, during the charge up turn, you remain vulnerable, meaning this is basically the equivalent of using 2 40 BP moves, 2 tackles, in a row. Actually even worse, since once you click it, you're committed to using up 2 turns. Oh, and it also has an accuracy of 75%. Why? Why, Game Freak, of all moves did you think that this one needed a nerf? Why is this being sold as a TM? Why is this even a move? It's yet another normal type move, and you can pretty much get Strength by now. In fact, all of these TMs, save for Submission, are normal types. The store is basically outclassed by a single unlimited use HM that you can get 1 town over. An honorable mention is Fly, a flying HM that has a base power of 70 and 95% accuracy. But like Dig, you're invulnerable during the charge up, so it's not that bad. But yeah, I teach Mega Punch and Submission to any Pokemon that can learn them. I usually skip past the rocket segments, but against Giovanni's Kangaskhan, our strongest move was Water Gun from Wartortle, which did barely anything thanks to our high HP. So even as it used Rage, arguably the worst attacking move in the game, with a base power of 20 and locking you in until the end of the battle, it still brings me down to 18 HP from full. That is possibly the most damage Giovanni has ever been able to do in his career. Koga's also a pretty bad boss battle, but we get a Gen 1 miss with Confusion on our first turn against Muck, who then proceeds to use Minimize, doubling its evasion, and from here it could snowball. If you didn't know, in Generation 1, regardless of what move you use, there is always a 1 in 256 chance that you miss, even if the accuracy is 100%. But Hypno's been killing it, and lands the next 2 Confusions in a row, while Muck misses his attempts to poison us. Let's use the remainder of this battle to talk about how bad poison moves are in this game. Half of the poison moves seem to only exist to inflict poison statuses onto Pokemon, having a very low base power, and pretty much all of them having awful accuracy. In fact, Poison Powder, mostly learned by Grass-type Pokemon, has better accuracy than Poison Gas and Smog, moves learned by pure Poison types. And Hypno, who's toxic in his own way. Poison as a status is also much weaker in this game, doing 116 damage a turn as opposed to its usual 1/8. Aside from Toxic, which does more damage each turn the Pokemon is in battle, it's rarely ever worth even bothering to land the Poison unless you have no better options for damage. Oh, and Poison's strongest attacking move is Sludge, which has a base power of 65, learned by only 2 Pokemon. The rival hasn't really had much of a presence in this run, and that's because he doesn't really do anything too crazy. His team's pretty varied, but he usually has pretty bad movesets, and with our new allowances, even basic super effective moves deal with individual Pokemon pretty quickly. It's actually wild how much tougher his team can be if you don't give him Blastoise. Out of Fire, Water, and Grass, he picks 2 Pokemon that don't have the same type as his starter. Execute is his choice for Grass, Growlithe for Fire, and Gyarados for Water, who comes pre-packed with Hydro Pump, a 120 base power move, coming off his 100 special attacking stat. Growlithe gets Ember, and Execute gets no stab moves at all. Who balanced his team? His Pokemon don't even evolve until literally the final battle, whereas he uses Gyarados from his earliest Pokemon Tower, basically before the 4th gym. I finally decided to grab Eevee and evolved him into a Jolteon as he learns Thunder Shock naturally by level up, so Gyarados is significantly less scary. If you're wondering why I called the rival Grandpa, I was trying to think of something that doesn't move all that well, and I hate the way I think sometimes because the very first thing that came into my mind was Granddad, because he's in an urn. I promise that's something that he would laugh at, but I still feel bad. Hey, subscribe to my channel and like the video. I don't typically ban Snorlax. He is very strong for sure, but he never really struck me as a Pokemon that's overpowered. That being said, he does kind of trivialize Sabrina, who otherwise is potentially the most difficult gym leader, due to her being blessed with the Psychic type specialty. So let's try this without him for a change. Now, Psychic types may be broken and overpowered, but there is indeed a counter. Other Psychic types. Hypno's attacking stat isn't horrible, and with Kadabra and Mr. Mime's abysmal defense, we can get through them pretty quickly with Mega Punch. Though Kadabra lands a crit with Psychic, and then Mr. Mime lands a crit with Double Slap, so Hypno's having a pretty rough time. Venomoth's weak to Confusion, and that leaves us with Alakazam, but with Hypno already pretty low, while Psychic resists Psychic, and Alakazam's defense isn't much better, so we should be fine. But Sabrina finds the one counter to my strategy. Because she doesn't see a good move, her AI resorts to just spamming Recover. Recover restores back 50% of the Pokemon's total HP, and we're doing less than that, so we basically make no progress. Occasionally we do a little over half, but with Mega Punch missing fairly often, she just recovers back the difference the next turn. And in this generation, the AI don't keep track of power points, so she can just spam Recover forever. This clearly isn't working, so I finally decide to switch out to Blastoise, but as I charge up a Skull Bash, Alakazam sets up Reflect, halving physical moves. And in this game, it's permanent until the Pokemon switches out, and with his massive special defense, he's pretty much invincible. And then he uses Psybeam, which lands a crit. If that was Psychic, Blastoise would have been dead. Skull Bash does even less damage now, so we're basically stuck. I give up and bring Hypno back, as she just goes back to spamming Recover. Hypno has Poison Gas, so at least try to go for some consistent extra damage with Poison, but obviously it doesn't do that much, and he can recover back any damage he takes anyway. At this point, I was just fishing for a crit, but then I realized, if Alakazam is poisoned, and he doesn't use Recover, we could eventually bring him down. And how do we stop him from using Recover? By tempting him with some fresh kills. I don't feel good about this, but what else can we do? At the very least, her move choice seems to be somewhat random, so it's not like we need to eat strong Psychics every turn, and we can even do some supplement damage in the meantime. Or Psywave, a usually terrible move which does between 1 point of damage to up to 50% more than the user's level, can land the highest roll, and Psybeam can finish Firo off before he can even move. Didn't even pretend to give him a chance. The worst part is that Alakazam takes no poison damage on turns when a Pokemon faints. I don't really want to sacrifice Jolteon, but he does have pretty good special defense for this game, and even Thunder Shock seems to do a decent amount of damage. If we can just rely on Alakazam spamming Psywaves, we might make it with minimal deaths, as long as he doesn't use Recover. Okay, 2 in a row, not bad. And then Thundershock crits, doing double the damage, bringing Alakazam down. Jolteon just barely managing to save her own life. That was genuinely the toughest Sabrina fight I've had. She's not necessarily an easy battle, but we've never struggled against her either. I guess if you give Alakazam more than one turn to stay alive, he can be terrifying. Thank God the devs decided to give him the worst psychic move in the game for some reason. Imagine having to eat his psychics every turn. We would have lost half the team. And to reward us for our tenacity, Sabrina gives us the worst psychic move in the game. We of course will be allowing it. On the topic of fixed damage moves, I also catch Ghastly. In Kanto, his usual role is to help me catch Snorlax, but he of course is banned. Gengar isn't a bad Pokemon by any means, but with its best stat being special, ghost moves being physical, and me banning sleep, its strongest move is Psychic, which you would rather have on a Psychic type Pokemon. But with us allowing fixed damage moves like Psywave, Ghastly does come with a move I thought I would allow, Nightshade, which does the exact same amount of damage as the level of the Pokemon using it. Fixed damage moves in general aren't entirely useless, especially on bulky Pokemon, but for the main campaign, you'd almost never want to waste a move slot on it. This is like the only thing that Ghastly has going for him this run. And I hate to break it to you, but even with our limitations, and Sabrina almost dismantling the run, Blaine and Giovanni are still completely pathetic gym leaders. It takes a little longer than usual, but both are swept away with Blastoise's baby water guns. Giovanni, the ground-type gym leader, only has one of his Pokemon equipped with the ground-type move. Dugtrio would Dig. Every other move he has is normal, except for one. His two Nidos both carry Poison Sting. You know, that move that we spoke about at the start of the game, which we decided wasn't even worth using for this challenge. Rhydon does also have a ground move, but Fissure doesn't do any damage. It's either a one-hit KO or it misses. Usually the latter. I really want to know what their goal was when designing the teams. Like, surely they had some sort of plan on how they wanted to handle difficulty. At this point it feels like I'm making this video to talk about how awful the trainers' moves are, rather than about the ones I'm actually using myself. But with every gym badge now in our possession, and the rival just being the same as before, all that's left is to take on the Pokemon League. Before going in, I switched up my team a little to include Pokemon I typically don't use for this game. Butterfree is now a bit useful thanks to us allowing powder moves, except for sleep, and Gengar's actually got a special use case that I'll get into detail later on. I also added Exeggutor to the team as his stats are pretty decent and I was planning on replacing Hypno, but as it turns out, he doesn't learn a single Psychic move via level up, Psychic the move being far too strong, so instead he'll be our Grass type, considering Lorelei may as well be a Water type Elite Four member. Hey, and Sabrina even gave us a special move which would be rude not to use. Well, I say that, but even with just a little Thundershock, Jolteon's able to sweep through her. Cloyster did confuse us, so I had to switch around a little, but we're able to make it to Jinx, the only one not weak to Electric, pretty painlessly. Instead, for her we have Pin Missile, a bug-type move like Fury Attack, but even stronger. Rather than having 15 BP, it has 18. Listen, it's stronger. Well, with it being super effective, landing a crit, and then the 1 in 4 chance to hit 4 times, Jolteon takes Jinx down in 1 turn. And spam a few more Thundershocks on Lapras, Lorelei down. I swear Bruno has some dirt on one of the Pokemon League's officials. I was expecting Water Gun to get the one-shot, it being 4 times effective against Onix, but confusion coming from Hypno, one-shotting both Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee was a surprise. And then even Onix. Machamp barely survives. On the turn, Bruno increases his defense. Confusion. Agatha's a ghost type specialist who mostly uses poison types, so why fix what ain't broke? Agatha switches out turn 1. I know she does this occasionally, but it's still funny to see happening, especially considering there doesn't feel like there's any reasoning behind it. Golbat does actually manage to survive, but not for long. Hello again. Gengar uses Dream Eater while we're still awake, and then puts us to sleep. Well, its best move is Dream Eater, which we resist, so we can just stay in as we wake up turn 1. Oh, and goodbye Gengar. Haunter survives, not for long. Welcome back Gengar. He uses his own Nightshade, but 56 points of damage isn't that much at this stage in the game. Thank you Gengar. Agatha's remaining Pokemon can't put us to sleep, so we can begin the Confusion spam. Hypno even pushes through Confusion twice in a row, and that leaves us with Lance. So I think it's Gengar's time in the spotlight. Well, first is Gyarados, so we let Jolteon make quick work of him, but with Dragonair out, Let's show you another Gen 1 quirk. Bringing out Gengar, Dragonair uses agility, doubling its speed. Our only moves are Lick and Nightshade, but we still do about 40%. And then Dragonair keeps using agility until she finally goes down. This is because of the way Smart AI is programmed. They always opt to use a super effective move if they have one, but they only check the type of the move, not how much damage it does. And this even extends to moves that don't deal any damage. Agility is a psychic type move and Gengar is a poison type, so Lance's Dragonairs are always going to just keep using agility. However, that's something that's pretty commonly known at this point. Here's something a little less known. Even disregarding that, aside from Gyarados, all of Lance's Pokemon only get normal type moves, so even if they did choose to attack Gengar, they have nothing for him. Well, actually his 2 Dragonair get Dragon Rage, but that's a fixed damage move, even weaker than the Nightshades that we took earlier, doing a fixed 40 points of damage. Aerodactyl, and even Dragonite, his strongest Pokemon on the other hand, have nothing, so we can just spam Nightshades and a few licks as Lance spamming potions drain their power points. And that's Lance down. Gengar not having taken a single point of damage. Gengar's also more or less a guaranteed encounter too, and even if we didn't have him, literally any rock type Pokemon would have been fine. I mean, we're on the second to last battle at this point, surely they weren't still worried about difficulty. And with the Elite Four down, how does the champion fare against our onslaught of bad moves? Pidgeot forces 2 Thunder Shocks while it uses a mirror move to use her own. Not sure what she was expecting. Alakazam gives me some mild PTSD when it uses Reflect, but Grandpa actually attacks us unlike Sabrina, so we're able to let Hypno bring him down before he recovers. Rhydon 2 takes a page out of Lance's books and only uses normal type moves. Except this time, his strongest move is Fury Attack. Oh god, what did they do to you? Gyarados is so unreasonably strong compared to the other non-starter Pokemon the rival uses. This one carries Hydro Pump and Hyper Beam, whereas Arcanine only gets Ember. And Exeggutor still doesn't have a stab move, his strongest being the normal type Stomp. Since Jolteon had already taken some damage, I let Exeggutor paralyze him with Stun Spore, and then slowly step away at his HP with Mega Drain. And finally it's Venusaur, who for some reason carries 3 different grass type moves. Good old Butterfree from the start of the game 4 times resists grass, and walls Venusaur completely. Spamming a few confusions puts an end to Venusaur, and the Nuzlocke. Look, I'm painfully aware this Nuzlocke was supposed to focus on me using terrible moves, and I spoke very little about the moves I ended up using, but I was hoping that you reached the same conclusion I did around halfway into the game. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. I could just spam tackle the entire game, and aside from the endgame timer being a higher number, we'll still end up here, nothing changed. It's kind of hard to make a game challenging when it doesn't even bother to fight back, but this did give me one final idea to truly try and make this game difficult. You know, without banning the entire Pokédex, every move, sawing my arms off and then gouging my eyes out. So if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I hope you look forward to more videos in the future.